I did want to make one opening statement. There's been some conversations about Mr. Goldsmith's arrest, and to tell you, I did, upon learning of Mr. Goldsmith's arrest, made two decisions. The first was that given the high standards we set for government service and the serious circumstances surrounding his arrest, Mr. Goldsmith could no longer continue to work at City Hall. The second was that I did not believe it was right for our administration to put out a story about an incident that had the potential to be even more suffering to the Goldsmith family. My highest and first obligation is to the people of this city, and that is why Mr. Goldsmith is no longer working with us. But I also believe, as an employer, employers have a responsibility to treat employees with some consideration, and that's how I built my business, that's how we run this government, and it's how we will continue to do so. I make no apologies for either the fact that Mr. Goldsmith has left city service or for treating the Goldsmith family with basic decency as he left. And I have long believed that public officials who are all too willing to humiliate the people who work for them whenever it's politically convenient or advantageous is an outrage, and I refuse to play that game. And I'll be happy to take some questions if anybody has any. Sir.
Mayor, Scott Stringer and others, though, accuse you of some type of a cover-up here. How do you respond to that?
Unfortunately, I suspect Mr. Stringer is unfamiliar with the facts. We put out a statement that is consistent with what I just said, announcing that Mr. Goldsmith is no longer working for the city, and it did point out that he is now looking for a job in the private sector, as you would expect he would. He has an obligation to feed his family, and he's going to try to do that.
Mayor, at what point did Mr. Goldsmith call you after his arrest, and what did he say?
He informed us on Sunday. I didn't talk to him on Sunday, but he informed us on Sunday. He and I had a conversation on Monday. He offered and I accepted his resignation on Monday morning. Yes, sir.
The press release you issued when he left indicated that he was leaving because he wanted to pursue business in the private sector, but he's actually put out a statement saying that that's actually the reason, not the reason. The reason was over this incident.
You can talk to Mr. Goldsmith. I can tell you he informed me that he would be going out looking for work in the private sector so that he could support his family, and that's what our statement said. Yes, sir.
Can you just elaborate about what it was about the charges that led you to believe that even if he wasn't found guilty yet, that even the accusation of the charges were enough to dismiss him?
I think that domestic violence is a phenomenally serious scourge in our society. I don't think there's any administration that has done as much as we have to combat domestic violence, whether it is the centers in each of the counties, whether it's the domestic violence focus of the police department or coordinators in the hospitals. We worked very hard to attack the problem of domestic violence, and the implication, the accusation, unfortunately made it untenable for him to continue to work for the city. Yes, sir.
The mayor's office to combat domestic violence on August 17th issued a new program, and they launched this to help bring more awareness to New Yorkers about domestic violence. But yet, you didn't make New Yorkers aware about this particular case involving the second man in charge.
I'm not familiar on a personal basis with what the charges are in Washington. We have never talked to anybody in Washington. We're very careful to never discuss what was going on in Washington because it would be totally inappropriate, and there could be an allegation that we tried to influence the decisions being made down there. And for that reason, I did not inform our Department of Investigation or Police Department. Nobody should. I did not want anybody to talk to anybody in Washington. We talked to Mr. Goldsmith's lawyer, who informed us that he would be returning to New York and that no charges would be filed, and that's what we know about it. Any other? Yes, sir.
Could you see anyone finding the statement that you put out misleading, in the sense that the reason why he is pursuing this job in the public sector or the private sector is not because he grew tired of city government, but because it was untenable for him to stay in city government?
I think the fact that he is no longer working in city government is my responsibility to make sure that's the case. I discussed it with him as soon as he came back. It was obvious that he could not. He offered his resignation, and I accepted it. Had he not, I would have terminated him. But the bottom line is, my first obligation is to make sure he no longer continues to work for the city, and then it is to treat him and his family with much respect as we can and not make their tragic situation any worse, and they've got to work it out for themselves.
But that's not my question. My question is, can you see anyone calling it misleading?
Only if you write it that way, you put it on television that way. I don't think that's the case. I think the obligation I have is, as an employer, to make sure that we treat all the people who work for New York City as respectfully as we can. They are devoting their lives to public service, but when somebody does something that makes them not able to continue to work for the city, my first obligation is right away is to make sure that's the case. Yes, sir.
Mayor, you say that you didn't want to get involved with this case, from what we understand here, but the irony here is that the day after the arrest, Plaxico Burress was signed by the New York Jets. But yet, in December of 2009, you got involved in that case by saying, quote, "It would be an outrage if we don't prosecute to the fullest extent of the law."
Plaxico Burress was arrested in New York City for violating a New York City rules on gun possession. Plaxico Burress served his time. He's now playing for the New York Jets, and I hope he has a great career.
But don't New Yorkers? But shouldn't New Yorkers know if their deputy mayor is arrested?
I always assumed that it would come out, but it's not my responsibility to spread a story. Yes, Miss?
Mayor, is there anything that Mr. Goldsmith or his lawyer told you that made you feel like maybe you really hadn't done anything wrong, and then did that play into your decision?
I can't speculate. I can only tell you we were informed by his lawyer that no charges were going to be filed against him. Perhaps you could talk to the officials in Washington. I don't know. I'll take a couple more questions and that's it. Yes, sir.
Have you had any conversations with Mr. Goldsmith since his allegations?
I don't think so whatsoever. During the transition, I made sure there was a smooth transition. He was working on a lot of important things. It was my responsibility to find a successor. I did in Kaz Holloway, who I think will do a spectacular job, and to make sure that Steve Goldsmith passed on to Kaz Holloway information about all the projects underway. That took 3 or 4 days, and then it was time for Mr. Goldsmith to go, and he did. Anybody, any new? Yes? I think it was obvious from the beginning of the conversation. He knew that he could not continue, and I said he knew he could not continue. When he first told us that he had been arrested, he offered his resignation. That was on a Sunday. I didn't talk to him until Monday.
Take one or two more.
Yes.
The public advocate suggested that you essentially located a hole in the law which allows you to, which otherwise would require you to reveal it had it been committed in New York City. Would you have revealed it had it?
I don't know that that's a hole. I didn't write the New York City law. Perhaps Mr. de Blasio was in the city council when it was passed. You'll have to ask him. If somebody is arrested in New York City, in our jurisdiction, we know what happens in the context of how our police and district attorneys work and what the procedures are here. When they're done outside of New York City, we don't know. But if a crime is committed or alleged crime is committed outside of New York City and it has to do with official business in New York City, then we do try to get involved, but with the caveat that we still don't know what the procedures are elsewhere. One last question.
When Mr. Goldsmith resigned, there was a lot of speculation that he was pushed out for doing a poor job on the blizzard last year. Would he be in government today if not for this incident?
Yes, he would be. I think that those allegations were misinformed. The snowstorm was a regrettable incident. We learned an awful lot from it. Hopefully the next time there's a big storm, we'll be able to get the trucks and buses and cars off the streets and be able to plow more effectively. And we've got a job at coordinating and informing. But Mr. Goldsmith did not get dismissed for a snowstorm. Any other topics?
How come you didn't hold any?
Just any other topics? I think we've had enough. My statement, I think, says it all. It became obvious that he couldn't work for the city, and I immediately made sure that he no longer did, and that we, as a policy, should try to treat each other, particularly those who devote their lives to public service, as humanely as possible and not make a terrible situation any worse for him and his family. Those are those things we did, and I make no apologies for either one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.